All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. This is the second webinar in the Lunch in the Wetlands series. Today's topic is utilizing drones in the fields. My name's Emma. I am a field technician with the BC Wildlife Federation, and I'm just going to do a quick introduction, and then I'll pass it over to Kyla to present the webinar. So as the BC Wildlife Federation is a provincial organization, we work and live across what is known as British Columbia, and we acknowledge and respect the First Nations who have lived in relationship with and stewarded these lands since time immemorial and continue to do so today. At the BC Wildlife Federation, we acknowledge that reconciliation takes time, and we are prioritizing building relationships with First Nations communities. The BCWF supports Indigenous-led conservation by partnering with First Nations on habitat restoration, education and training, and knowledge sharing opportunities. So we're excited to support and work alongside the many nations and bands, and we're very grateful to have the guidance from elders, knowledge keepers, and community members throughout our work. Today, I am calling in from the unceded and traditional territories of the Coquitlam First Nations. And if you know whose traditional territory you are currently on, please send it in the chat box now. As I know that we have a lot of people joining us from many different places today. And if you don't know whose land you're on, I encourage you to make yourself familiar with the Indigenous peoples whose land you occupy. So if everyone wants to send that in the chat, that is great. Thanks. So I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Wildlife Habitat Canada. We're really grateful for all of our sponsors, and because of them, we're able to make webinars like this one free and open to the public. I think today people probably have various levels of knowledge of the BC Wildlife Federation. So I just wanted to do a quick overview of our organization and specifically the Wetlands Education Program. So the Wetlands Education Program works to restore, enhance, and conserve wetlands all across British Columbia. The program runs many different workshops and educational programming, both virtually and in person. We have some of the workshops listed here: the Wetlands Institute, Map Our Marshes, and Wetlands Keepers. And we have the Wetlands workforce that does wetland monitoring and maintenance in different work pods all across the province. We also have our fish habitat restoration and education program that works to do a lot of educational planting workshops and restoration of riparian zones. We have our youth program that does summer camps during the summer and educational youth programming throughout the year. And we have our wonderful in-office staff that work to organize our membership and process core certificates, which are needed if you wanted to get a hunting license in British Columbia. So if you want to look more into all of our programming, you can go to our website at bcwf.bc.ca. Today, we just ask that you keep yourself muted to avoid background noise. If you have any questions, you can send them in the chat throughout the webinar, and then we'll get to questions at the end. Myself and Kendall will also be monitoring the chat, so if you need any help, you can send it there, and we will help you with your IT support as best we can. Great. So today we have Kyla, the BC Wildlife Federation's Wetland Assessment and Field Coordinator, who will be doing the presentation, and I will now pass it off to her.
Thanks, Emma. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending where you're joining from. So today I'm going to talk about utilizing drones in the field. Just a little introduction about me. I am the Wetland Assessment and Field Coordinator with the BC Wildlife Federation. I've been here for the last 3 years. I am coming to you today from the traditional territory of the Silks Okanagan people in Summerland. I've been doing field work in various capacities for the last 7+ years. I took a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from the University of Lethbridge over in Alberta, and then have been working kind of in this field ever since. When I first learned about drones in 2019, I remember seeing a video about it was a drone like zooming along a river and doing a health assessment of a river. And I thought, oh, drones are going to replace ecologists. And that was like a common idea I heard from other people too. And then the other common idea was that from the general public was that drones are spying on us and being used as weapons. And I'm not even touch on those aspects today. I'm just going to talk about how we can use drones as a tool in our toolbox as ecologists and other professionals working in the field. I started using drones with the BC Wildlife Federation in 2021, and for the last few years have been learning about different areas that we can use them on our team, and I love seeing how people can make drones work for them. So I'm not a drone expert, but I found the learning curve quite steep, figuring out what you need, what you might use drones for, what kind of training different people need. And I would just like to see that very kind of reduced for other people and see how drones can improve efficiencies in fieldwork. So I'm just going to put a poll up on the screen. I'd love to hear from the people during today how you've used, oh no, okay, there, how you've used drones or how much knowledge you have of drones. And I can't see what the, oh, am I not sharing my screen anymore, Emma?
Yeah, are you sharing your screen?
Yeah, can you see it or no?
No, I can't see it right now.
Okay, let me try again. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah.
With the poll question on it?
And the poll doesn't seem to be working.
Okay.
It's not somebody else is logged in. So I don't know if there's any staff members on here who are also logged in, but that might.
Oh, gotcha.
So
That
if
could be the
people
issue.
want to put it in the chat, that would be great. Thank you.
Oh, now I see it come up too. So either put it in the
I got
chat.
it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kendall. So A, no, I'm brand new to drones. B, I'm new, but I've done some research. C, yes, but I don't have a license, such as with using a micro drones. Or yes, I have a basic or advanced license. Wow, we have quite the spread of people from all different steps.
Okay, I'm gonna end the poll and share the results now.
Awesome, thanks, Kendall. So yeah, we have people all the way from being new to drones to having a license, which is great. So I'm just gonna kind of go through from like the initial setup of starting to use drones, things that we've considered, what applications you might want to use drones under. So first, applications, why you might want to use a drone and how they can be helpful. Secondly, we'll talk about what kind of technology options or what kind of drone you might need to support those applications. And then we'll talk a little bit about orthophotos, because this is one of the most common applications in our fields and what to consider and some of the limitations of these. And then we'll briefly talk about some of the videography and photography capabilities and tools in these drones. And then lastly, permissions and licenses associated with using these tools. And if we have time, we'll go through some of the technicalities of if you are doing advanced drone operations and the permitting and process required with that. So first, maybe the most obvious, the easiest, most accessible learning curve is just using drones to see what you can't see over the tree line. So scouting out areas where you can't quite get to, or investigating areas that have poor satellite imagery. So this is up by Valemont. One of the crews was working on wetland assessments this year, and you can't really see what the access is coming into the site. It's difficult to determine if this is grass or shrub. And sometimes the imagery can be quite old and outdated. So on the same site, they flew the drone, and you can see there's a rock feature that you probably wouldn't have noticed on a satellite imagery. There's trails through here, so that can help inform where you might want to get to. There's building over here. You might also use it to figure out what path is like easiest to get into this wetland. I should note most of my examples are wetland related because that's how we've been using drones, but it can apply to all different kinds of mapping and field work out in the world. So also using the drones for alternate perspectives for navigation. So on the left, I couldn't quite tell from the ground where the wetland extended to, or which areas I might want to check out on the ground. So I could kind of see that most of the wetlands surrounding the open water is similar vegetation, except for this interesting feature over here, which turned out to be more of a developed fen among a more wet marsh. And then on the right, this is an interesting site. In imagery, I could not tell at all that there was a large rock feature. So when I was coming into this site, I didn't know that this was a big cliff basically. And with using the drone, I was able to kind of navigate around that to get to the sites that I wanted to access, as well as this imagery. This is a beaver created pond. And in the imagery, this all looked very shallow, like you could walk through it. Once I flew the drone, I easily saw this was 2+ meters deep in areas, and I was not going to be easily accessing specific areas of the site. So this is just a kind of summary. So scouting areas of interest where you may want to further investigating access, how you might get to the site, estimating percent cover. This is especially relevant when you're doing percent cover of trees and shrubs, such as in like those shrubby sites that are difficult to get through. It can be easy to be biased based on where your trail is taking you through, say a swamp like this floodplain ecosystem here. And by looking straight down, you can really calibrate yourself on what you are seeing versus what the rest of the area is. So drawing little areas, creating a proper map if you need to. And then monitoring hydro period is another interesting option rather than photo monitoring from the side. Such as like with a game camera, using a photo at a set location at specific times to see how water is changing on the landscape. This photo on the right is from the same site as on the left, and we were looking for where the beaver dam occurred in this large wetland complex. So the drone could really make it a lot easier to find the exact linear feature of this little beaver dam. When we're on the ground, it can be difficult falling into the beaver flooded landscape to get through. And then mapping. So this is a map from the Kootenai pod Birch shared with me, and they used the drone to create an orthophoto, which we'll talk about later, which can be used to calculate specific areas and delineate sites that you might not be able to see from especially outdated imagery. So here they used the orthophoto to map where specific invasive species occurred and where they did treatment areas, as well as where they did planting. So you can imagine using your GPS and trying to like trace your track as you walk along these sites is a lot more time intensive than just looking at your orthophoto and being able to delineate those areas. So now let's go through a few different mapping opportunities with using the drones. The first is aerial imagery. This is a site, you can see kind of the resolution in the surrounding area wasn't great and was quite outdated. And once we flew the drone, this is hundreds of individual photos stitched together. And we can quite clearly see the differences in vegetation, in water, where there might be inundation. And then the same orthophoto we also use to create a digital elevation model. So these can be built from most drone images when you've stitched them together. This is a 2D DEM, so you can't rotate it or view it like from a side profile at all. It gets all choppy, but you can see it straight down. An important thing to keep in note is that the lower end drones, such as without like a LiDAR sensor, cannot penetrate through the vegetation. So this is just the elevation from the top of the vegetation, which is what the drone can see. So the yellow is the lowest elevation, and then transitions into orange and red and then green. So the highest areas kind of show up differently than the lowest. What if you do have a LiDAR sensor, which we'll get into later, that's what you need to penetrate through water or vegetation to get it, what the actual elevation of the ground is. And then this is one that we have only created a couple times, but helps you see a lot more on the site. This is a hillshade that's overlaid with the DEM. So this can be developed, and it's better. You can see it in a 3D way if you collect with oblique imagery. So that's a photo that is at a 45-degree angle, and then you can kind of manipulate this, view it from a side profile, look at it from different angles rather than just straight down. And this was developed with a multi-directional hillshade type and then overlaid with the opaque DEM with transparency of the DEM. So you can see here, like the open water is a lot clearer than the grassy kind of marsh or fen adjacent, and then you can see the texture changes again when you get into shrubs, and then the highest spots, of course, are those coniferous forests in the green. But this, I'll just switch back and forth a couple times. The amount of detail that you can discern from the hillshade overlaid of the DEM is a lot better than just the standard DEM. So this is a cool tool. And then multispectral is something that we don't use on our team, but is a common application of drones, especially in agriculture and forestry. So multispectral means that drones can collect images in different spectral bands that we cannot see with our eyes. So this including red, green, blue, near infrared, and red edge, and is especially of interest for different vegetation types, the health of vegetation, especially in agriculture, like the example on the right. These can be used to identify healthy areas versus stressed areas to more accurately apply fertilizers or pesticides, herbicides, harvest, etc. And the way that multispectral works, I'll just go through this really briefly, but the diagram on the right kind of shows that plants and soil, they absorb and reflect different wavelengths from sunlight depending on the contents of that material. So for when a plant is healthy and like working, using photosynthesis, it will absorb a lot of red and blue light, and it will reflect a lot of green light and a lot more infrared. But if it was less healthy, it would be showing up differently. So you can see that here, the stressed area is reflecting more green, whereas the healthy area is absorbing more green. And the way it works with our eyes is like when we're looking at a chlorophyll rich or green plant, we're seeing that wavelength of light that the plant reflects, but not the ones that it absorbs. And then lastly, I'll talk about thermal sensors. So this is available on some of the lower end drones. We have one that we can use to see thermal imagery, and it's really helpful to identify groundwater influences, such as in this river, identify or exposed soil, or animals. So we can use it to see where water tends to kind of pool and warm up versus where there might be groundwater inflowing into the area, which has subsequent implications in fish habitat and understanding site. So all of these different applications that you could use a drone for, what drone should you use? And this is a common sentiment to everyone that seems to start using drones. You're not simply buy one drone, because you quickly realize you may want to do more than one thing that is best for more than one tool. So I'm not going to touch on fixed wings drones, which are basically like a mini airplane, which I haven't used or researched, but those are still considered drones, even though they look like a plane, and are generally used on longer and bigger missions. So big wildlife habitat or big wildlife monitoring or larger areas. We're going to focus on just quadcopters. And even then, there's so many options. This is just like a very small selection. Kind of for the beginner user that thinks that this might be able to help with your field work. So firstly, micro drones are the most accessible. less than 250 grams is what the definition of a micro drone is. And with this, there's less restrictions from Transport Canada, and you don't need a license to fly these. You also don't need to maintain visual line of sight with a micro drone, although it's really important to still fly all drones safely and be aware of your surroundings. Drones can, no matter the size, endanger humans, animals, and especially like planes and helicopters and other flying objects. I've accidentally like injured my hand by holding a drone when it was like taking off or landing in a tough situation. So they are a good tool, but be mindful that they are dangerous in no matter the size. I also should mention that I'm mostly talking about DJI drones because they're the most common that I've seen, especially at an entry level. But there are many other companies and options, especially as you get into larger devices and more different payloads. So the micro drone that DJI has is the Mini. We have Mini 2s, which is kind of like the one on the right, and then the Mini 3 Pro is the one in the middle. And these come with either the screen integrated into the remote, like that one in the picture, or there's some that don't have the screen integrated into the remote, and you attach your phone. So you still have the like joysticks and buttons, but then the actual screen for seeing what your drone is seeing is used in your phone. And there's kind of benefits and drawbacks to both of these options. Some smart controllers, that's what these are called, don't support third-party apps, which we'll get into in a minute, but the built-in screen has much better battery than some of our phones. And having the integrated screen makes it much easier to transfer using the same drone between different people. So everyone doesn't have to have the app installed on their phone. Everyone doesn't have to have an account with DJI, especially now with some phones that remove apps if you haven't been using them. That's something that's kind of got me in the field. And I thought, oh, I have the DJI app, like everything's good. Not noticing that my phone has removed it. It's also just like one more update to check for if you're relying on your phone. So you need to make sure that the app is updated, as well as the software that connects the drone to the remote and the app. Whereas if you have it integrated in the remote, you're just checking that your remote and your drone are good. You don't have to worry about the app being on your phone. But if you're just one person, like the remotes that rely on your phone that don't have an integrated controller are cheaper. So it's like a more accessible tool. And if you're just one person using it, it might be totally fine, especially if you remember to check the apps on your phone. The one big selling feature on these micro drones is that you don't have to maintain line of sight. So if you're flying over a canopy, you can still fly it beyond that. You are a little bit limited in range, especially with these smaller ones, which totally depends on the terrain of where you are, but that is one benefit, and not having to have a license. Secondly, we'll talk about drones with a fixed sensor. So this would be things like the Mavics. We have a Mavic Enterprise Thermal. You can also get these with multispectral. So you have some choices in additional sensors, but you usually have to choose one drone that comes with one sensor. And they can be a little bit more expensive. And then you can get drones with a real-time kinematic GPS. So it's just a lot higher GPS accuracy. The regular drones, I think, are 3 to 5 meter accuracy. And when you have the RTK, you're getting reportedly 1 centimeter horizontal accuracy and 1.5 centimeters of vertical accuracy. So depending on the application, such as on our restoration sites, we're interested in having that higher GPS accuracy. And then finally, drones with removable payloads. This is where you can get into like $50, $100, $200,000 drones, depending on what you're looking for. And you can get removable payloads for so many options. In our field, the most appealing is to have LiDAR, because anyone that's done mapping or forestry knows that that's a really great tool to be able to understand what kind of vegetation you have, what's underneath the vegetation, different canopy layers, as well as multispectral. So that's the one I talked about with the agricultural example. But there's everything you can think of. You can get like speakers for search and rescue, more advanced thermal sensors that look for specific types of wildlife that have a specific heat signature. The thermal sensors that can look through a canopy to see animals underneath the canopy. I saw one, I'm not sure that it's where it's available or where it's legal. There's a fishing drone that will like bring your bait further out from your boat and drop a line further from where you are. There's so many options. So I'm just gonna leave it at that and say, if you're interested in something, you can probably find it. Now I'm going to take a step back and go back to one of the most common applications, because it kind of ties into which drone you're using. So most of these drones can support orthophotos, but we'll get into that in a minute. So what is an orthophoto? It's a high resolution replacement essentially for satellite imagery. So this is just an ArcGIS, one of the standardly freely available base maps, and it doesn't have specific restoration work that we know has been done on the ground because the imagery is a bit out of date. And then this is the orthophoto that we took on site after the restoration was done. So you can see a spring, the landscape was quite inundated, there's a lot of surface water. And when you're taking an orthophoto, you can control what time of year your photo is taken, when you're taking the photos of like before or after, pre and post specific activities. Thinking about seasonality and when specific plants are showing up differently. So in the fall, as you notice, like certain plants change color earlier or later, that can be used to identify different types of vegetation. So there's a lot of applications where orthophotos can help us. It's important that orthophotos are GPS referenced. So each photo with most drones has a GPS point associated with it. But an orthophoto is multiple photos stitched together. And so I'm just going to go over the theory of this for a minute, because this is something that people are often confused about. You can't take one photo and use an area off of it. And the reason for this is that there's an inherent bird's eye distortion with any photo. So only the center of a photo is truly accurate for shape and area calculation. And the further you get away from the center of an image, the more distorted the area or length or whatever calculations are accurate from that photo. So you can see this example to get more towards the eyes, it's like a fisheye effect. And so when you do an orthophoto, you want to have a lot of overlap between photos so that it's only the center of the photo that is going to be used in the end. So depending on the application, depending on your height of vegetation, the height of your flight, will determine how much overlap you can do. Honestly, one of the biggest limitations is how much battery you have and how big your site is. So for really big sites, you might be pushed to collect an orthophoto with your available batteries, and you might be using slightly less percent overlap, knowing that that's going to be a limitation of your orthophoto. You're also supposed to consider what type of vegetation you have. So trees should have more overlap, especially the taller trees, whereas if you just have grass or like a flat surface, you can get away with a little bit less overlap. And there's standards for how much overlap you may want depending on what kind of site you're on. So the process to do an orthophoto, you need to take those photos that have the, say, 80% overlap. You can do this manually. Is a lot of work, and it's really difficult to get enough overlap, both horizontally and vertically, but it is possible. Especially in smaller sites, it's a little bit more feasible. We've tried to do it on bigger sites, and you end up taking like 600 photos, which is difficult to do manually and make sure that you have it. But there's flight planning apps. So depending on the drone, some of them are Mavic 3 Enterprise has it integrated into the smart controller. So you can see this is taking a 3D orthophoto mission. So it's taking oblique photos from that 45-degree angle as well as straight down so that we can create that hillshade model. And you can see in the bottom left corner that there's a map and it's following along those lines, same as the idea of the photo above. And each of those photos is geotagged. When you're doing something for 3D, the angle of the photo is also recorded, and then you can have them stitched together with a multitude of third-party apps. I think you might be able to do it in Arc now, but you don't have to do it manually. You used to have to overlay every single photo and use specific points between like the satellite image and the photo from your drone to make sure you're placing it in the right location. And now there are softwares that just do it automatically. So you upload your 600 photos, say, and it will stitch them together and produce you a TIFF file that you can use for your mapping. Yeah, there's third-party apps that you can install on the remote that will make this orthophoto process easy, or you can use the one that's in some of the remotes. This is one of the biggest caveats of buying a drone, that not all drones support third-party apps or have orthophoto stitching or an orthophoto mission integrated into the remote. So this is just an example of one software that we've used, Maps Made Easy, or Drone, what's it called? Drones Made Easy. So Maps Made Easy and Drones Made Easy are kind of together, and Drone Deploy is another one. And basically the DJI, or the drone creator, has to use the SDK for hardware control for a third party to use it. So there's some drones that haven't had that SDK release, so then third party apps are not compatible with the drones. And then there's a list, basically, if you're wondering if your drone's supported, or a drone you're thinking of buying is supported, you can refer to this list. Now they have this extra section, commonly requested devices that cannot be supported due to DJI not enabling third-party app. So the Mini 4 is not supported yet. The Air 3 series is not supported. The Mavic 3, when they're not enterprise, are not supported, and the Mini 2 SE. We'll say that we have bought drones in the past, like we had the Mini 2, and when we first bought it, it wasn't supported, and then eventually DJI released the software, or the SDK for software to be developed to be compatible with that drone. So if you're purchasing a new drone with the intention of using it for ortho photos, I think it's really important to consider if you're going to be able to use it for the purpose that you're interested in this case, ortho photos. So just the practicality of how do you actually do this? You identify your area of interest. You just draw a big polygon around the area you want to be included, and they do maintain line of sight with your drone and oversee the autopilot mission. Sometimes birds will start like bomb diving your drone. You need to keep it around that and bring it home. You don't want to be disturbing wildlife. You also don't want your drone carried away by a raptor or something. And keeping an eye on weather is another one, because most of the drones are not supposed to be flown in the rain. And keeping an eye on your battery. Usually they'll come home towards the end, but how long your batteries can, or how long your flight can go, really depends on wind conditions. Because sometimes they'll say, oh, your drone's good for 45 minutes, start flying, you'll get 20 minutes in, and you've already killed your battery. So then you might need to adjust your orthophoto and like your polygon plan and say, I'm not gonna have enough batteries. I need to shrink my area or focus on specific areas of interest. Oh yeah, this is just a short video of it's flying its mission. You basically don't have to do anything except for keep an eye on it, make sure everything's flying okay. So next, I'm gonna just briefly touch on photography and videography tools. So a lot of the DJI drones have some cool tools built into them. So there's follow me mode, which can automatically track a target and follow the person or the dog or the whatever you're following, boat, car. And I'm not going to go into these extensively, but this is kind of what it looks like. You just draw whatever, identify what you're interested in, and then you can follow it, or they'll do like a zoom circle around it. There's some pretty cool videos that you can make with these tools just from playing around with them. And this is what the drone screen, whether it's on your phone or your smart controller, typically looks like. So it just tells you kind of how high you are, how far away you are, how fast you're going, and then a map of where you're doing and what the drone is seeing, like what the camera is seeing. So I have another poll. I don't know, Kendall, if you can get this one to work. What license do you currently have or intend to have for your operations? So now you have a somewhat of an idea of what kind of things a bigger drone or a smaller drone, micro drone, can do. Another minute. So no license is not the wrong answer. So if you're not gonna fly drones or you're only gonna use micro drones, you don't need to have a license. I realize I haven't discussed the difference between basic and advanced license yet, which I will. It's basically, it depends on where you're going to be flying. And the requirements related to both of those. I just want to have an idea if we should go into some of the advanced license pieces or not. Did you end the poll, Kendall? Okay, awesome,
Yeah,
thanks.
I just shared it.
Super. So 36, wow, everyone's so spread out, every poll, 36% no license, 21% basic license, 25% advanced license, and 19% I'm not sure. So I'll just briefly go over all of them. So for all drones, from what I've seen, DJI has built-in restrictions within 5.56 kilometers of airports and 1.8 kilometers from heliports. So those are on heliports, usually connected to hospitals. And I put it in kilometers, but it's 3 nautical miles is the standard from airports and 1 nautical mile from heliports. And then there's a limitation, like by Transport Canada, you're not allowed to fly above 120 meters above ground level generally. Let me talk about that for right now. So restricted airspaces, these are the areas around airports and heliports. You can see, depending on the area, there's also like paragliding areas will sometimes, I think, have limitations. And then there's also the limitation, especially affects us in BC, is anytime you are in a park, you cannot fly. So national parks, provincial parks. Sometimes parks will grant permits if the work you're doing is like permitted generally or is going to be low impact. Provincial parks are sometimes a bit easier than federal parks. Wildfires, this really affects us. So 5 nautical miles surrounding any wildfires, 9.3, which is equal to 9.3 kilometers. And that is even if the restricted airspace or controlled airspace isn't showing up yet on the flight planning. So even if there's like a fresh start, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're not flying around those areas. There's been a couple like public media pushes and some incidents where operations for fire suppression have been limited because drones in the area and they can't be sure that the area is safe for helicopters and airplanes. So yeah, 5 nautical miles and altitude 3,000 feet. So it's the difference. A basic drone license, you need a license if you're flying a drone that's over 250 grams. That's the short answer. If you need a basic or advanced, depends on where you're going to be flying. So either of them are a written exam from Transport Canada. With the basic license, you can only fly 3 nautical miles from airports and over 1 nautical mile from heliports. You have to fly over 30 meters in distance from the public, so you can't really fly in populated areas. And you must maintain visual line of sight, which is pretty much across the board in most cases. So basic license is often sufficient outside of major cities and away from people, but it still requires flight planning ahead of time. So you can look at this map and have an idea of where you're going to be flying. The yellow areas, I think can still fly, and it's the red areas that are a no-go with a basic license, basically. So if you're doing really remote work and you're unlikely to be in an area with a airport, then you're probably okay. You may not need to get an advanced license, or maybe only one person on your team, if there's multiple people, needs to get their advanced license. But if you want to be flying in some of these more populated areas and you know that you have sites in those, it may be something you need to get your advanced license for. So to get your advanced license, there's a written Transport Canada exam. I believe it's the same pool of questions as the basic exam, but it's a higher percent to pass. And then there's also, once you do your Transport Canada exam, then you have your basic license, and then you still have to do your flight review, which is only in specific cities, which is also a limitation in BC because of some of the bigger centers that only have flight reviewers. When I was living in Cranbrook, there wasn't a flight reviewer. It was like Kelowna or Calgary that I had to go to do my flight review. So something to keep in mind. It can take a while if you're in a remote place to find someone to do your flight review. But if you have your advanced license, you can obtain permits to fly in those restricted areas. And you can fly within or up to 5 meters from the public or over people with approved drones. There's specific drones that have been deemed safe to fly over people. And it's most of the larger, more common, like DJI drones and stuff are on that list, but you still must maintain visual line of sight. So an advanced license would be needed if you're flying near airports or over the public. And both the basic and the advanced still require flight planning, but for advanced, you need to get authorizations to fly in those restricted areas. And the test is really hard. So our team we have many successful people that have finally taken it, but to pass the advanced test is really difficult. It took me multiple tries to get through it. We took a course. There's a lot of prep. I don't want to make it sound like it's really easy. It's a transport candidate exam. They ask you a million questions that are about airports, how a plane works, how the specific aerodynamics of your drone work. Like there's a lot of pilots say this test is ridiculous. I asked a pilot some of the questions on the test. He was like, I have no idea. Like a commercial pilot had no idea of some of the questions on the test. So it's a lot of work. You can do it, just know that you're not going to be doing it in a day or two. So I have a spot now for questions, or I have additional slides on getting permits for advanced drone operations. I'm just gonna look through.
Yeah, there's one question in the chat. The question is, where can we find the standards for taking drone ortho photos?
Yeah, good question. I would have to double check. There used to be guidelines either on drone deploy or drones made easy that were freely available. Kendall, do you maybe want to have a quick look and see if you can find either of those? Because you're probably familiar with what they are. It'll just be a standard on like percent overlap for trees, percent overlap for bare ground. But yeah, I think the drones made easy or maps made easy had specifications.
Yeah, I'll try looking through some folders and send them in the chat if I find anything.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I can also, if you send me an email, I can find that out later too. Then I think I'll just go through a little bit more what is part of doing an advanced drone operation, because I had no idea and I had a hard time finding out what the actual protocol was when I went to do my first advanced drone operation. So if you're applying to fly within restricted areas, first you're going to plan your mission, which you have to do for any over 250-gram drone with your basic or advanced license. So where you're going to take off, what you're going to do, where your landing point is, what your flight height is, possible flyaway risks, the nearest airport, etc., etc. I'm not getting into the legalities of it, but when you take your either exam, you go through these pieces that you need to think about. Once you've done that, you need to request permissions from Nav Canada first. So there's an online app, it's quite easy. Then you need to create an authorizations request and submit it to DJI to actually unlock it on your drone. As part of this, you'll have to show that you've gotten authorization from Nav Canada, and then you'll have to unlock the areas on your remote. And to do that, you need the certificate from DJI. There's this app, Drone Pilot Canada. It is $60, but it's very worthwhile to help you plan out your missions. No possible risks, know the nearest airport, who you need to call if you have a flyaway event. I'm not going into the technicalities, but would recommend looking at it. There's not too much really available that lines up with this. The creator of this has put a lot of work into this, as well as resources for doing your basic or advanced tests. So your prep for doing your advanced drone operation, your site review, your flight plan. You first have to make sure that your advanced license. So once you've done your flight review, you have a certificate that says you have an advanced license, is uploaded to Nav Canada, ensuring that your drone is properly registered. You have to do that with any drone with Nav Canada. Making sure your serial numbers and like all your certificate numbers are lining up properly. And then you'll have to upload your drone registration to that Nav Canada portal. And then in the DJI app, you also have to set things up. So making sure your pilot information and drone information are updated and accurate. This is just what the Nav drone portal looks like. So you can see kind of previous operations you've done, create a new operation. This is just in Penticton. So in Naramata, say I wanted to do a mission, looking more towards the Poplar Grove area. You select that you want an advanced drone, you say when you're going to do it, that you're going to maintain visual line of sight. I'd highly recommend add a bigger area than you actually expect to need, and make sure that you consider your takeoff and landing points so that you don't run into being unable to finish your mission or return home in the most direct route, as well as any other like perspectives you might want to get. Like maybe your site is right on this tip of the lake and you want to get a video flying in from the open lake. Consider that. Don't just consider like which area you're interested in. Consider what areas you might want to be looking at your area from. Because if you mess this up, you can't fix it in the field and your drone will not fly outside of the authorized area. Doing the Nav Canada authorization is usually quite quick. Usually it's automatically approved, but it's best to do it as far in advance as you can. So you submit your request. Once it's done, it says approved. But then you still have to unlock it in DJI, which I had no idea about the first couple of times I tried. This can take 24 hours. So this is where you will actually be controlling where your drone can and cannot fly. Again, make sure you've considered, it will have to be usually within the Nav Canada authorization, because you also have to upload to the DJI portal saying, Nav Canada has given me permission. Things to consider is that you can only load one unlocking certificate at a time to your drone. And if there was any typos in your registration or in your DJI authorization, it won't show up on your remote. So it's good to check that you know how to do this and that everything's working before you're actually relying on going to a site on a specific day. And you can only do 24-hour intervals. Last I checked when you do this process. So it's important to think about what time of day you're going to be doing it. And if you're waiting, depending on weather, you might need to submit multiple days. And make sure that the time is not when you're going to be mid-flight. So make your time like midnight or during the dark hours so that it's not gonna be like noon and resetting. And then you have to land your drone, load a new token or load a new certificate before you can fly your other mission. So that's like the very brief advanced drone operations, but I thought was worth adding in here because I couldn't find anything standardized the first couple times I tried to do it. And that's all I have. So if there's any other questions, people can feel free to put them in the chat, or if you'd like to just take yourself off mute or raise your hand. Francesca, have you have a question?
Hi, yeah. I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit about like the average size of the area for the flights that you've done in the past, and what would be considered like a small or a large area?
Yeah, good question. So the question was, can I describe what the average area of a flight that we do and what I would consider like a small, medium, large flight? Is that right? You're a little bit choppy.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Yeah, I think it really depends on which drone you have, like a mini drone, a large flight would be like a couple hectares, might take a couple batteries. Whereas the larger drones, a couple hectares is no problem. So it also depends on what kind of terrain you're in, because if you're in a more mountainous area or you're in heavy tree canopy cover, you will have like a lower connectivity to your drone. So it will give you a warning, like you're getting too far away. So with the mini drone, I've gotten like 500 meters away and had it beep at me and say, you're too far, you need to come back. Whereas the big drone, I've flown like further than 500 meters when I have a really clear line of sight, such as if I'm on kind of a knoll of a hill, and being able to do multiple hectares with multiple batteries, but it also really depends on the wind speed. So it's a very good answer. I would say like 200 by 200 meters is a very small area. A very large area would be like 5 to 10 hectares.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. That's helpful.
I just wanted to note that I found a document about orthophoto standards. I put it in the chat as a reply to Francesca's original question, just so everyone knows.
Thanks, Kendall. That's nice of you. All right, well, if there's no other questions, I think that we can let everyone go and enjoy the rest of their lunch break. But thanks, Emma, so much for hosting today.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Kyla. That was great. Thanks everybody for coming out today. We have another webinar this Friday on World Wetlands Day. And we have some more upcoming if you want to check out the website. Thanks.
I've also linked them in the chat.
It looks like somebody has their hand up.
Oh yeah,
I
that was
think it's Francesca.
Yeah.
She did
Oh,
say
okay.
thanks, so I think I answered